Hello ladies and gentlemen, Big Daddy Top Hat here. While in the past on this channel we have gone back and looked at the history of many of the various characters from the Street Fighter universe, what we are yet to do is heavily analyse the fighting game appearances of any of the Marvel characters who crossed over into Capcom games to square off with them. So today, let's finally change that. When I was a child in the mid-90s, like many of you around the world, my mind would be absolutely blown the first time I saw superheroes, who I was used to seeing on television, suddenly squaring off against my fighting game favourites. Not only was this the stuff of an inconceivable dream, but in my child brain this elevated the Street Fighter roster to literally the same level as superheroes. After all, by playing these games it appeared that the Capcom lineup were capable of holding their own. Of course, the first Marvel fighters we would see cross over into Capcom fighting games would be a selection from the Xmen. So who better to first look at on this show than that of the Mutant who first led the charge than that of Cyclops. So let us not just look at this amazing fighter's moveset, along with all of his Capcom video game appearances, but check out some of his key appearances prior to the Marvel vs Capcom series too. This, ladies and gentlemen, is the story of Cyclops in Capcom fighting games. Yeah! Cyclops as a character was created long before any fighter created by Capcom even existed yet, surfacing for the first time as early as September of 1963. This would be in the first ever published X-Men comic that would be created by Stan Lee and Jack Kirby. This iconic comic book would feature a team of superheroes called the X-Men, a group of mutants with superhuman abilities led and taught by Professor X. Amongst them from day one would be Cyclops, who appears in these comic books with the ability to emit powerful beams of energy from his eyes, and can only control the beams with the aid of special eyewear, which he must wear at all times. Over 30 years after these comic books were first published, Cyclops would utilise this now legendary ability amongst the many fighting games that he would appear in. But prior to any of these ambitious crossovers, Cyclops would make his way over to video games at an earlier date. The first of these would be The Uncanny X-Men, released on the NES in 1989. In this dreadful licensed game published by LJN, players would take control of several X-Men utilising their powers to progress through a series of missions. In this maiden X-Men game, Cyclops would appear as one of the 6 playable characters, with his eye-beam shooting ability obviously coming into play to shoot projectiles. There would be many X-Men games made past this point, with multiple appearances from our blue and yellow bodysuit spandex wearing chum. But since we are mostly focusing on the Capcom side of this character's history today, let's skip ahead to Cyclops' first appearance in a truly excellent game. This would occur in the arcades in 1992, with the incredible 6-player beat-em-up that was both published and developed by Konami. His appearance as a playable character in this all-time classic saw him with a design that was based off of his appearances within Pride of the X-Men. Pride of the X-Men was made as a pilot for an animated series that would later be released on home VHS. However, no episodic TV show was ever produced due to Marvel having huge financial issues after they had been purchased by New World Pictures, who proceeded to stop working on all of their animated projects, with the exception of Muppet Babies. Which begs the question, why have we never seen any Muppet Babies arcade beat-em-ups? Or even Muppets Cross Capcom for that matter. Still, as we know, this was neither the end for Cyclops in either the animations or video games. So, what would happen next? Well, the Marvel Entertainment Group would be sold to the Andrews Group, and later Margaret Loach of Fox Children's Network had seen the Pride of the X-Men pilot and championed it. So 3 years after Pride of the X-Men was made, she was quick to set up an order for 13 episodes of X-Men, with the show proving so popular that 5 seasons in total would air. It was through this era for the franchise that Marvel and Capcom would begin working together. The Capcom-Marvel relationship would begin in 1993 with the release of the Punisher arcade game. This arcade beat-em-up's popularity, paired with Capcom's success with their own Street Fighter license, would lead to Capcom's next related project, which would mark Cyclops' first ever Capcom fighting game appearance. The video game I am of course referring to is X-Men Children of the Atom, released in 1994 and based off of an X-Men comic book of the same name. This mouth-watering fighting game would even feature voice acting from the same people who voiced the characters in Fox's animated show, meaning elements from various pieces of X-Men media were incorporated into this classic. For Cyclops, along with the rest of the roster who appeared in this colourful game, they fight it out in one-on-one matches with an end goal of defeating Juggernaut and Magneto. Elements of both Street Fighter 2 and Darkstalkers were drawn on when creating this game, but it stood out due to its unique combo system whereby even action could be performed mid-air within the game's lavish multi-tier environments. This style action and mechanics would serve as a blueprint for all of the Marvel vs Capcom games that would precede it. But what for Cyclops' appearance in this game? Well, as one would expect, Cyclops has the ability to be able to emit scarlet beams from his eyes, which he refers to as optic blasts. This is possible due to the fact that he is constantly absorbing ambient energy, such as sunlight, which in turn powers this technique. Sadly for Cyclops, due to a head injury he sustained as a child, he has no way of shutting off this power. However, it can be suppressed by the ruby quartz lens visor or sunglasses that he must wear at all times. The field leader of the X-Men is often celebrated as a master tactician and strategist, as well as being a great pilot. Further to this, he is an excellent martial artist, holding black belts in both Aikido and Judo, thus making him the perfect character to surface within a fighting game. Within Children of the Atom, Cyclops can utilise body slams, leg throws, neck breakers, rapid punches and more. But in a more trademark sense, he can also unleash manoeuvres such as the optic drill and iconic optic blast. If things get really messy though, Cyclops can also pull off super moves and utilise his X abilities, allowing him to pull off both the mega optic blast and terrifying super optic blast. Wow. If players are able to get to the end of the game and defeat Magneto, the villain then tries to persuade Cyclops to leave the X-Men and instead join him on his conquest of mankind. However, being the do-gooder that he is, he instead refuses, so is attacked by the Master of Magnet. Cyclops, along with the other X-Men, manages to escape and safely returns to the base to embrace his lover Jean Grey, surviving to fight another time. The next Marvel Capcom fighting game would arrive on the market in the following year of 1995, and would simply be titled Marvel Superheroes. This game featured very similar fighting mechanics to Children of the Atom, but sadly while many of the X-Men did surface as playable fighters in this one, our hero of the day Cyclops was not amongst them. Still, it would not be long until he would return to the world of Capcom fighters, resurfacing within the mind-blowing X-Men vs Street Fighter in 1996. Now, I really can't explain how much this game absolutely blew my mind as a child, seeing my favourites from two totally non-associated universes mix it up. Well, non-associated I guess if you hadn't already played the crap out of Children of the Atom, as apparently the idea for this game was born out of fans' love for Akuma's appearance as a secret boss within that X-Men game. So, prior to Cyclops becoming a part of this tag team madness, he had already squared off with Akuma before 2 years earlier. Cyclops would not just function as a playable fighter in this game, but he would be a flag bearer for his respective franchise, not only appearing on different versions of this game's box art, but also shaking hands with Ryu on the arcade game's Attract screen, heavily implying that the pair were the two leaders of their respective franchises. Again, I must say, this was a bit mind-blowing as a kid, as I was aware that the large majority of people like to play as Ryu best, but both the American animated series and the live-action movie, along with all of the toys and merchandise, were insistent that Guile had always been the leader of the Street Fighters, and Capcom didn't even bother to put him in this game. So Western marketing had been lying to us for all these years regarding Guile's significance. Speaking of Cyclops and the Western X-Men meeting the Eastern Street Fighters, a huge part of this crossover was in part done to try and increase Marvel superheroes' popularity in Japan, a move that seemed to work out for them spiffingly. Within this ambitious crossover, once again many of the mechanics from the previous Marvel-based Capcom fighting games are carried over, along with Cyclops' moveset that he is capable of in Children of the Atom. In fact, his sprite work remains largely the same too, but this didn't stop it from being hella cool to see him take part in tag team action alongside a lineup from Street Fighter. Teaming up with Ryu, the pair at the end of the game take on the ridiculous screen-filling opponent Apocalypse. Overcoming this imposing obstacle means that Ryu and Cyclops can do battle with each other to find out who really is the king of fighters. After an encounter whereby the Hadouken meets the Optic Blast, the humans and mutants reflect on the destruction of Apocalypse's base, with Cyclops feeling that he has gained an even greater understanding for the need for humans and mutants to live in peace. He thanks Ryu and refers to him as a great fighter and tells him it is up to the pair of them to keep the dream of peace alive. The X-Men then leave and continue the dream of fighting for peace between mutants and humans. 1997 would bring with it the next crossover, with the next installment being called Marvel Superheroes vs Street Fighter, which features similar mechanics to the previous game, but introduces other heroes from the Marvel Universe such as Spider-Man, Captain America and company. Reaching the end in this one sees Cyclops take on Apocalypse again, but after this there is an even tougher threat to contend with, Cyber Akuma, because as if regular Shin Akuma is not enough to worry about. After defeating this foe, Cyclops simply thanks Ryu for fighting alongside him again. 1998 would see the arrival of Marvel vs Capcom Clash of Superheroes. Yet another fighting game of the same style, with this entry showing a roster being diversified on the Capcom side of things, to include characters other than those who appear in Street Fighter games. Sadly, Cyclops would be left out of this one, but he would resurface in arguably the greatest game of this entire series, Marvel vs Capcom 2 New Age of Heroes. This redonkulous game takes you for a ride through a chaotic video game consisting of 3 vs 3 tag team matches utilising combinations of 56 different characters. Cyclops returns in this ultimate form of lunacy, bringing back many of his classic manoeuvres such as his awesome Cyclone Kick, which functions as a perfect sweep attack. After taking part in various encounters, Cyclops has one final challenge in this game, taking out the game's last boss known as Abyss, a legendary creature forgotten by time and who up until this point was believed to be just a fairy tale. Marvel vs Capcom 2 would obviously be the final Marvel and Capcom crossover game for many years, with there not being a new entry in this series until the release of Marvel vs Capcom 3 Fate of Two Worlds in 2011. Sadly, despite this game having its fair share of X-Men characters included within it, Cyclops was not one who was chosen. Neither was he in the reiteration of the game either. However, as of this year, the fan community have had our backs, as they have gone to the effort of finally modding him into the game. Considering what an important role Cyclops played in the previous games, as one of many gamers' favourite fighters to play as, it was a shame that up until previously he had never been playable in the 3rd installment. After all, that handshake between Ryu and Cyclops is now iconic and symbolic of what the series had been all about. Event Hubs reported on the mod in January 2022, who would highlight that Game & Lift, an apparently dedicated fan of Cyclops, dedicated time towards unravelling this character's combo potential in Ultimate Marvel vs Capcom 3's environment. The creator would upload a new combo video that really highlights how Cyclops should have been there from the beginning. Just wow. Unfortunately, there is a sad ending to today's tale, as a character who would lead the charge on Marvel's behalf within the world of Capcom games would not show up in the most recent game in the series, Marvel vs Capcom Infinite. This divisive game would not see release until the evil Walt Disney Corporation purchased Marvel Entertainment. And because the X-Men were not part of their cinematic universe, the very characters who popularised Marvel and Capcom crossovers would all be disgustingly discluded completely. During this era, whereby Fox still had the license to create X-Men movies, Capcom would attempt to justify their actions by claiming that modern Marvel fans may not even be able to remember the X-Men anymore anyway, and fans are more likely to know characters from Guardian of the Galaxy and Black Panther instead now. With regards to no Cyclops in the game, they would also highlight that while Captain Marvel may seem like a strange pick, she's fantastic. She fits the gameplay, she fits the story, and they're going to be really pushing her as a strong female lead all the way up into the movie. We're trying to take everything into account and choose the best characters. Capcom producer Pete Rosas would anger many people with his dismissiveness towards Cyclops and friends, whereby in an interview of GameSpot he would state that Xmen didn't even matter, as in his own words, if you were to actually think about it, these characters are just functions, they're just doing things. Magneto, case in point, is a favourite because he has 8-way dash, and he's really fast, right? Well, guess what? Nova can do the same thing, Captain Marvel can do the same thing, Ultron can do the same thing. It seems that neither Disney nor Capcom gave one crap whatsoever regarding who long-term fans had supported during the Marvel vs. Capcom franchise since day one, and for some reason didn't even care who paying customers wanted to see in the game. Instead, they chose to put in the title characters they simply wanted to push to their audience, rather than simply giving us the characters we liked, like say Cyclops. Disney Marvel may not give a crap about your taste in superheroes and video games, but Big Daddy Top Hat certainly cares. Hence why I brought to you this retrospective today on one of my personal favourite Marvel fighters who exists within Capcom history. If you are somehow new here and found enjoyment from today's video, I've created large swaths of videos like this covering characters from the Street Fighter universe, so be sure to check some of their sprawling stories out after you have done with this one. Also, be sure to like this video and leave a comment which Marvel vs. Capcom fighter you would like to hear me talk about next. Videos like this are in part made possible due to the generous people who back my work over on Patreon. Speaking of whom, special thank yous go out to A Murder of Crows, Carl Johnson, Sebastian Velez, Heyo, Paulo Lopez, Nostalgia Collector, Ben Harradine, Corio Marsh Sr., Ron Dinched, Evan Border, Philip Manth, Azur Arkai, Dropkin Varela, Michael Calix, Ego, Jordan Durant, Ian Boyle, Nick Daniels, Princess Zana, Daniel Daly, Computer Man, House of Attack, Gary Pinkett, ECU Professor, Johnny Holly, August Piazza, Justin Wang, Capcom vs SNK, Hermes Gonzalez, Man Shovel, Michael Hall, Sang Hee, Norma Stitz, Langston Miller, Noob, Sarah Powell, Flaming Renee, Marvin Araliga, TOG Driver, Louis Viant, John Bates, David Bale, Chris Fisk, Rick67, Antonio Rodriguez, Craig Jenkins, Synth Spaces, Punk Toast, Steve, Awesome Jacket Dude, and everybody else who backs my work over on the Patreon platform. Thank you for being a part of the most exclusive club on all of YouTube. But anyone can join, so is it exclusive really? So just shut the hell up and become one of my Patreon backers. That'd be much appreciated. Thank you. Bye.